As you know, I'm Trudy Carey of Patterson Self-Storage. We're a locally owned family business. We're pleased to be the main sponsor for today's event. And a little housekeeping, for those who need a foil-lined shopping bag and $500 of gift certificates for your clients, they may be on your seat if you have an end seat, or you can pick them up in the back of the room. Our centers are located at the corner of Highway 101 in Patterson. You've probably seen our green roofs from the freeway. We're on the mountainside. We're kind of unusual. We're the only self-storage that's near a residential area. I'm not sure they're thrilled, but it's great for us. You probably see our green roofs and the red chairs. Then the other facility we have is right near Marvia, across from the fire station on Cali Route at Patterson. You know, you might not think self-storage is exciting, but believe me, it is. You have to be on your toes in self-storage, like when an ex-spouse rents a police costume and comes in and tries to get into her spouse's unit. You don't think those things happen, but it does happen. And similar things like that. So it's kind of, we have like a story of the day. You know, like when a gentleman passed away and 4 different people came in to claim they were his wife. And she'd get to the unit, it's like, not really. Our business goes hand in hand with realtors. We're part therapists just like you are. Our clients are going through stressful times. Nobody moves because it's fun. Like, come on. They're putting their home on the market and needing to declutter or stage, which is traumatic to begin with. They're new to town and they rent before they buy, usually if they're coming to the university. They're moving out of town, they're getting divorced or remarried, they've lost a loved one, new empty nesters, they're downsizing, they're remodeling, or they're going to have to rent. Sound familiar? Our goal is to make their life a little less stressful in this transition. We take our expertise and we try to help them out. We've had a realtor program for over 25 years. If you tell your client to mention your name when they come in, they receive a realtor discount comprised of a free lock, a move-in discount on their rent, and 25% off on all boxes and moving supplies in our store. Then we go the extra step and we will call you and let you know your client's been in, because sometimes you don't have the listing signed yet, and it's nice to know that they're decluttering and they're getting ready and they're finally moving on. I just did that yesterday. We had a client move in and I called her yesterday. Some things that make us unique, many retirement home clients don't have a lot of storage. So they'll use us for seasonal storage, like a walk-in closet. Some people put a chair in the middle or an ottoman and they can store their clothes, they store Christmas ornaments, whatever. But so when we hit that niche, we installed cedar lined spaces and temperature controlled spaces. So that's kind of unusual. We also have auto storage with trickle chargers for car collectors, or just sometimes there's a listing and you want to get the 4 cars out of the driveway for a month. Or maybe you could show the garage and see across it and store a car. After the fires hit, we added smaller spaces for items that clients might want to put away when their house is on the market or they're traveling, you know, bigger than a safe deposit box. You know, maybe it's a photo album, birth certificates that won't fit in there, and we have those for short-term use in the summer. We also have extra high ceilings because we're shaped like a barn, so our spaces go from 9 feet to 15 feet tall. Most self-storage is 7 feet. So if your client can stack or put their kayak straight up or a couch on end, they can save a lot of money with the height. Just so you know, not all self-storages are the same. You want a convenient location to get in and out, so when you want to pick up something, it's easy. Also for the movers, you want a big truck to come in. A lot of centers, you can't get a big truck in, and they'll have to dolly all the household stuff from the street, which runs up your moving bill because they're by the hour usually. People, you wouldn't think it, but you all know security is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. But not all self-storages have high-end security systems. And there are places in town that have had, there's at least 5 centers in town that have had theft. So just when you're calling, if your client's calling, just have them ask that question, have you had any security problems? And then cleanliness is a big deal. I don't want to see anything not clean at my place. When I walk around, I don't want to see a rodent, I don't want to see a speck of dust if I can help it. So we run it probably better than my house, and the clients appreciate that. And just having sizes, we have over 35 sizes. So for example, if you had to store something really long, like a 10-foot ladder, 15-foot ladder, we have a 5x15 where you get the length, but you don't have to pay for like a 10x25 or 10x20 to store a ladder. And that's really a nice in-between size. Caution your clients, if they're not coming to us, just be careful that when they go somewhere else, if there's a few companies that you get a leader price, but the very next month it will double, because we know that the tenants get angry and they move to us after that. So it kind of costs you a double move. So just be careful when you rent. If someone rents elsewhere, ask them how long that price is going to be good for. And it's always best to visit a self-storage before you rent. Some of the maintenance or the locations are a little bit frightening. If you are a woman, or a guy, I guess, if they're not well lit and you don't feel safe there, that's not a good thing. I hope this was helpful. We're proud to be a sponsor. You can check us out on our website. Our tenants, 70% are referred to us or previous customers. We're very proud about that.
So I'm actually optimistic this time around. If you remember last time, I was trying to kind of keep you positive in a pretty dour outlook environment. We had rates that were about to shoot up, and the Fed that was still going pretty gung-ho on inflation, impacts to purchasing power. We saw sales going down that unfortunately materialized. This year I'm optimistic. I think last year was the low point, meaning that things are going to get better this year, that you kind of survived the worst year on record since the 2008 financial crisis. So you can kind of congratulate yourself, pat yourself on the back and all of that. But I want to kind of thread the needle and make sure that you're not going to kind of pop the champagne corks, kind of over celebration kind of a mode. This year is going to be better, but it's going to be inch by inch, right? Meaning that it's still very much just kind of a nose to the grindstone, as it's been over the last couple of years. I think you can't take your foot off the gas, even as I'm going to present a forecast that's relatively optimistic. It's still very much going to be a market share game. And the bottom line is that a few years ago, we were really spoiled when rates were 3%, even less than 3%. We were doing 510,000 units a year, and those numbers are still a ways off. So things are going to get better, but it's not going to be that kind of autopilot cruise control environment. The upshot of that is, I think that, as Paul kind of referenced, there's a lot of wild cards going on. Stuff at the national level, lawsuits, stuff at the state level, all of California's self-inflicted wounds that we love to layer on top of, challenging economic times. But I think the recipe for success in all of that is just to be that trusted advisor, really embrace that role as the kind of expert, the consultant in chief, because consumers really do need us more than ever now, right? So I'm not really worried about the profession of real estate and of course we have the market going for us as well, but I think the flip side of that is that consumers really need us. And so the recipe for success is going to be hitching our cart to that consumer, horse, and making sure that we're creating those win-wins. A lot of you guys probably know my colleague Gov Hutchinson, and he always comes out and talks about the RPA and the new laws and all of that stuff. As somebody who has recently tried to buy and sell a house, it's like the RPA is huge, right? It's like 5,000 pages. Like, people don't want to go through that on your own. There's all kinds of horror stories about releasing investigation contingencies and then finding out the homeowner's insurance is like 30 grand, and now all of a sudden somebody lost their EMDs and all kinds of crazy stuff. So they really, really need us now more than ever. More so even than when the RPA was like 2 pages back in the day and all of that stuff, right? Like, these are very complex transactions. They're high stakes, in places like this, the median price is like $1.3, $1.4 million. They really need us, but therefore then it's incumbent on us to kind of step it up and bring our A game. I think it's going to be the kind of survival of the fittest when it comes to those folks that are really actually providing value to consumers are going to be the ones that not only survive but thrive. And of course, I am very optimistic from that standpoint. I'm going to justify that UCSB student loan for a little bit and talk about the macro economy, but also because I think we're in just such a macro driven environment. I did about 110 speeches last year, all up and down the state. I've already put like 5, I think actually including today, I'm like at 6,000 miles maybe so far, just this year, and going from places like Shasta to San Diego and everywhere in between. And it's incredible how little I had to tinker with the slide deck from area to area, right? Because it's just such a macro driven show. It's pretty much the same give or take, no matter where you are, because the jump in rates from 3 to 7, 8% hits consumers the same no matter where you are, right? Proportionately, doubling of interest rates affects you the same whether you're in the market for a $300,000 house or a $3 million house. And that is really what's dictating a lot of the trends. The good news is that I think we're past the worst in terms of rates, but again, we're gonna have to kind of thread that needle, because you have, on the one hand, people that are scared off by a 6.5% rate, and for those folks, I think some perspective is key. 6.5% is really like a normal rate by historical standards. I think a few years ago I joked with you guys how I'm the son of a guy who used to like brag about his 12.5% mortgage rate, right? When he went and bought his house in like 1979, he got a 12.5% mortgage rate, and he like walked out of the bank and he was like high-fiving strangers on the sidewalk and stuff. That's, helpful perspective, because 6% really is a normal rate for like 90% of recorded history outside of the 2008 financial crisis. So that's kind of point number one. On the other hand, you have folks that think 3% is normal, right? And they're qualified and employed and have all this money and are paying these really high rents, waiting to perfectly time the market and jump back in at 3, 4, 5%. Those people, I think, are shooting themselves in the foot, right? Because if you look at the forecasts, the interest rates are going to come down, but only incrementally, right? Whereas prices are going to continue to rise. And what buyers, I think, forget about all the time is that if I'm wrong and rates plummet and you do see a 4% rate, guess what? All the other buyers are going to see that too. And what you gain in lower rates, you're probably going to lose out on in terms of purchase price, competitiveness, all of that stuff. You've got a lot of people suffering from that kind of brother-in-law effect that I call it, where it's like, you should wait on the sidelines, right? When I bought that car last year, right before I came, I think I told you how I was filling out the paperwork at Subaru. The guy's like, oh, you're the chief economist at CAR. He's like, you gotta see this email my brother-in-law just sent me. He like turned his computer screen around and was like, hurry up and sell your house, and then like sit on the sidelines and just wait for the. And the kind of good news is that I think if I'm wrong on my rate forecast and things do go down, that costs you absolutely nothing, right? Because you go out and refi, you're in good shape, whereas you can't kind of take a time machine back and accumulate wealth and equity and pay down principal on a property that you don't even own. And you're like gonna be paying somebody's mortgage over the next 12 months. It's just whether it's gonna be yours or your landlord's. And I think that's the thing people always forget. Somebody sent me an article the other day that showed returns on housing compared to returns on other types of investments like gold and Bitcoin and all this other stuff and stock portfolio. And I always laugh at stuff like that because I'm like, yeah, but you can't like also live in your stock portfolio, right? And you're gonna have to buy a pretty big lump of gold to also, dual purpose that as your residence. So people forget about that part. I think, giving some of that long-term perspective is absolutely paramount right now, because you have a lot of people that forget housing is a long-run game and it's not about timing the market, buying low and selling high and doing all this whiz-bang stuff. Probably gonna do a little bit better on rates, but not enough that it kind of benefits you to sit on the sidelines, right? So I think rates will continue to come down. Macro standpoint, that will help the market to come up off that bottom. We're already seeing that in the first few months of the year. But we do have some risks out there as well. So again, consumers can stop spending. That's what's driving most of the growth. And I think, a lot of that's going on the credit card. Savings rates are very low. Credit cards are starting to get delinquent. So slower economic growth, but that's actually probably a positive this year for housing in the sense that it'll give the Fed cover to step back on that Fed funds rate, and we will get slightly lower rates. So what does it mean for housing? Again, you can kind of celebrate but not over-celebrate the fact that last year will be the low point. We should see inventory start to come back a little bit, and for me that's the limiting factor. It's like so easy to obsess on the impact of higher rates on buyers, right? Like I don't qualify for as much money, demand is lower, et cetera, but the jump from 3% to 7% has decimated inventory, not just for right now, but like for the foreseeable future. People talk about the lock-in effect, and in California it's really bad. You have a lot of folks that are locked in 3-4% that are really reluctant to want to move. As rates start to come down, you'll see some of those folks at that 5.5-6%, of which there still is about 15% or so of the homeowners out there that kind of won't be locked in to those super low rate loans, and I think that's the thing that's going to enable more growth. It's not, we've always had more buyers than homes to put them in. Even when rates jumped to 8%, we still had more demand than supply. The effects on supply have been even worse than the effects on demand, and demand turns around a lot quicker, right? Rates go down from 8 to 7 to 6.5, and we had a really unseasonably strong January, end of January, beginning of February, right? We didn't see that same kind of resurgence in folks trying to sell their homes. So still imbalanced, and that's why, again, I think sitting on the sidelines is kind of, it's a myth that sitting on the sidelines means doing yourself a favor financially. It's going to be more expensive. We have prices going up 6%. We have inventory staying pretty tight and only incremental improvements on interest rates. So if you've been waiting around, I think now is the time you've been waiting for. You're going to kick yourself. I kind of joke that we're going to look back on the good old days when the median price in California was only $1 million, and be like, man, we should have bought when everything was only $1 million. So the other thing I hear still, like just last week, somebody was saying, what about the foreclosures, right? And so I think we just got to stamp out that brother-in-law effect and talk about why the prospects for a major foreclosure crisis that translated to you saving hundreds of thousands of dollars on your purchase price is not going to happen. Like, your brother-in-law just isn't that good at math, and we need to be able to speak to that to consumers who are, again, gainfully employed and renting, right? Because they're missing the boat, I think, in a lot of ways, and that's where I think the opportunities are. We need to evangelize for home ownership and remind people that it's a long run, not a short run game. We need to give them perspective on where rates are right now, what they look like in the past, and what they're gonna look like over the near term, because I think all of those things support you getting into the market, right? Like, the best time to buy a house is always like 20 years ago, but the second best time is always today, right? And I think that remains totally unmarred by this jump in rates, this Fed fight against inflation, right? These are all short-run things. Long-term, California has way too many people, not enough homes. That means prices only ever go one way over the long run. That's what your brother-in-law always forgets to tell you, and where I think we can have an impact and move the needle regardless of what happens in the macro economy, right? You got a lot of qualified buyers sitting on the sidelines because they think they're gonna end up saving themselves some money down the road. The other thing I would say is that certain segments of the market, the high-end, all-cash sales, investors, it's funny, when you look at investors, people who are focused long-term, they're doubling down, right? They're out there buying stuff, trying to rent it, trying to flip it. One of the things we've noticed about the buyer pool is while we still have more than enough buyers out there, they tend to be more picky, and that's created all kinds of opportunities for the flippers to come in and take the stuff, make it more camera ready, and you've seen that come back around. Vacation and second homes are still doing well outside of places like Palm Springs, where they're really kind of, clamping down on stuff like Airbnbs, which has made them a little bit less attractive. But there are some segments of the market that are punching above their weight. So even as we expect overall kind of resale, seller turned home buyer to remain relatively depressed, because you got all these repeat, seller buyers that don't want to give up their low rate loans. There's other parts of the market that are still doing well. First time buyers, it's a pain to work with buyers because the market is so tight, right? You got to show them like 40 million properties and submit like 10 million RPAs before you finally get them into a closed transact, like thousands of dollars on gas and whatever. But as a share of the market, they're actually growing because they don't come with some of that baggage of being locked into a low rate loan. They still believe in home ownership. They still want it. And so I think, it feels good, right? You get guys like my dad who didn't even graduate high school on that kind of property ladder towards wealth accumulation and all of that stuff, but also just strategically from a business standpoint, you want to be working in the segments that are actually growing. So you get that kind of win-win, feel-good element. We also have potential policies coming down the pipe that could really, really help. And I know in a market like this one in particular, the capital gains is an absolute killer. And so I'll show you some really encouraging numbers on if we end up getting this doubling of the capital gains exemption through, where you can deduct 500 or $1 million, right? Depending on whether you're single or married. This is something that's being kicked around in Congress, it frees up a lot of potentially locked-in inventory, including about, I think it's something like 20,000 potential units here in Santa Barbara County alone. So respond to red alerts, make Krista your very best friend, and whatever she asks you to do, make sure you jump through all those hoops, because good policy can really help, bad policy can really hurt, and so now is the time to kind of use that to our benefit. The recipe for success, whether it's to the market, to the interest rates, to the lawsuits, to the whatever, is just to be helpful to those buyers and sellers out there, and you're going to have nothing to worry about, and why I still remain optimistic. I think the main thing we can do is really to lean on the data to kind of evangelize for housing and home ownership and help folks, or I would say prevent folks from making a big mistake. Somebody asked me how we convince folks to buy right now. I was like, we don't have to convince people to do anything. What we do need to do is like make sure they're looking at the right information to make an informed decision. If you look at the data, you can't help but come to the conclusion that I should have bought a long time ago, and by that standard, sooner the better, right? And that still remains true. So let's talk a little bit about the economy and the market. Rates are gonna go down, but again, it's gonna be inch by inch. This is the inflation stuff. Got to justify the student loan, but more importantly, this is the thing that the Fed cares about, right? So that's the reason why macroeconomics matters for us as a group of real estate professionals, is because until this blue line here, which is the headline inflation rate, gets down to about 2%, the Fed's going to be loath to do too much cutting on the Fed funds rate, which means that we're not going to see treasuries go down too much. We're moving in the right direction. We used to be at 9%, now we're at about 3%. And we've been making pretty consistent progress, but it's also been very incremental over the last 6 months. That's because we still have a labor market shortage. Won't go too deep into the weeds on macroeconomy stuff, but we're in this unique time where we have too many jobs and not enough workers to fill them, especially in the service sector. That's driving costs up. I was just meeting with an AE from South Lake Tahoe, and she said it's gonna start costing $23 an hour for somebody to work at McDonald's there, and this is all a function of the labor shortage, which is feeding into inflation. So that's the kind of linkage there, right? Is that when McDonald's pays $23 an hour for somebody to flip burgers, then you end up, not having a 99-cent menu anymore, kind of thing. That's where we're at on inflation. We are where the Fed's not going to be doing a whole lot of cutting next year. Moving in the right direction, but you don't want to throw out your back, kind of congratulating yourself for having survived, because it's not going to get better at a rapid pace. And I think by that standard, again, this idea that buyers should be sitting on the sidelines is very misplaced. You can kind of see it too if you look at interest rates, right? So we were up at 5% 10-year treasury, right? And as inflation improved, we saw those numbers come down. We got a good Fed meeting in December. We had decent inflation numbers in December as well, and that kind of blue line, which is the 10-year treasury, that's what really matters for 30-year fixed rate mortgages. That came down from 5% to 4%. But if you look at the tail end here, did I put that on? Yeah, you can see it's kind of like plateauing and maybe even going up a little bit, right? The inflation's coming down, but it's inch by inch, and now they say that the Fed probably won't cut rates in March, and it might not happen until the summer. Bond market freaks out, goes back up. Bottom line is that none of these numbers suggest a 5% rate by the end of this year, right? I think low sixes is probably a best case scenario. Stuff's getting better, but it's gonna be very, very incremental. I always say, inflation's like weight loss, right? When you first hit the gym and you're super out of shape, melts right off, but then the six-pack never materializes, no matter how much you're grinding in there every day. That's kind of it's gonna be asymptotic is what the data nerds would call it. We're gonna kind of zero in on 2%, but it's gonna be a very slow roll. And I think the bond market is kind of backing up this story that rates are gonna decline only incrementally. That's really important, I think, for those buyers to understand. You can see it in 30-year fixed rate mortgages. These are the Freddie Mac numbers, which are actually a little bit more tame even than the daily numbers, but we're at basically 6.8% after being up at about 8.25% at one point there a few months ago. So again, if you've been waiting around, 6.5%, 6.7% is amazing, right? My dad would be borrowing money from anybody who was offering a loan of money and buying as much as he could. But again, this kind of flies in the face of these prognostications that rates are just going to continue to plummet. The window of opportunity probably already happened, and prices are only higher. I would print out this chart and show it to all these highly high income, gainfully employed renters that I know that are trying to time the market perfectly. This is as far of a history back as I can show you. It's about 55 years of data on 30-year fixed rate mortgage rates. The gray stuff denotes periods where the mortgage rate was at or above 6%. And pretty much outside of the 2008 financial crisis, rates have always been at 6% or more, including back in the 70s, 80s, again, when 12% was a good rate. So rates are normal now, 3%. Someone was like, when are we gonna see 3% rates again? And I laughed because I was like, if we do see 3% rates, it means like something catastrophic happened again to the economy. We got much bigger fish to fry than like, what is the cost of borrowing? It's gonna mean a major pandemic or like a war or some kind of shenanigans where everything basically grinds to a halt. You're not gonna care what rates are. That was like a once in a lifetime kind of thing. 6% is actually good, right? And I think that's like kind of important for folks to know. If I'm wrong and rates go to 5%, refi next year, you save a boatload of money, God bless, you've accumulated a bunch of equity. In the meantime, my wrong forecast cost you nothing, versus your wrong forecast means you lose 2 years of price appreciation and wealth accumulation, et cetera, et cetera. So, where do you want your risk to kind of be? And again, I think that's a story that's worth telling. These are the new mortgage purchase applications, and the red stuff on the right is like the first 2 months of this year. They're still super duper depressed, right? I like kind of scratch my head at these numbers. This is getting rid of all the refis. This is just how many people are applying for loans, and it's actually really pathetic, right? Like buyer demand should be lower because rates have jumped up a lot. We all qualify for less mortgage now. Those people at the margins have been priced out. So demand's gonna be lower, no doubt about it. Should it be as low as what we're seeing right now? I would argue that makes no sense. In fact, you have to go, if you annualize those mortgage applications, you have to go all the way back to like the mid-1990s to find a year with less buyer demand than we had last year, right? Which is pretty incredible. It's worse even than the 2008 financial crisis, right? And I started to like dig into that, like how does that possibly make sense? We have 21% fewer folks trying to buy a house last year when we had less than 4% unemployment than we did back in 2010 when 1 out of 10 people didn't have a job. So like rates have jumped up and that has killed off home buyer demand, but it shouldn't be as depressed, right? Like we had almost triple the level of unemployment as we have right now, and yet more people were buying homes back then. Just doesn't make sense. And this is where I say that no matter what happens to the macro economy, we can be out there evangelizing for home ownership and getting those gainfully employed high-income renters to start, getting some return on that housing investment that they're making. Good news is we're already starting to see that. Sales in California in January were up about 6%. So that's kind of where I say that jump to 8.25 on the 30-year fixed rate mortgage probably helped us, right? Because psychologically, it kind of makes 6%. It puts those in a different perspective, right? Everyone was hyper-focused on going from 3 to 6 or 7. Then once they went to 8.25 and back down to 6.5, 6.5 doesn't seem as scary. And I think that's what you're seeing in those kind of January, February numbers where those pendings really started to shoot up as people were like, shoot, maybe 5% rates aren't right around the corner and I should jump in at 6.5%, especially as prices continue to go up, the market gets more competitive, that kind of demand response is much quicker than the supply response, meaning that you're having a harder and harder time as a buyer the longer you wait, essentially. Again, macro-driven show, when you look at it geographically, and I know we got a bunch of local experts, and Casey only gave me 45 minutes, so I can only bring like 350 slides or whatever. But it doesn't really matter geographically at the end of the day. Those same big declines that we were seeing when rates went from 3 to 7% are now being reversed across the board. It doesn't matter whether you're in Shasta, in SLO, where I live here in Santa Barbara, San Diego, you name it, we're seeing more or less that same kind of jump. The one exception is Southern California, where LA plays a huge part. LA put on a huge mansion tax, and the part of the market that we see really driving the show right now is at the top end of the market. So something tells me they're not enjoying that same level of rebound, and that's dragging down the total Southern California number. But outside of that, more or less same kind of experience, 8 to 15% increases as those rates came down, buyers came back. That was true across the board, no matter where you are. You can see the same thing again, Santa Barbara numbers. I didn't belabor these too much, but you can see sales have actually been trending up for the last 3 months. A lot of that again is happening at the top end of the market. These are the California numbers. If you look at the yellow stuff, really, everything from like 2 million upwards is growing by double digits again. So the market's rebounding, top end really responding to that reduction in rates, and again, high income earners still doing really well. So, all these high income renters, I'd be like grabbing them by their lapels, right? All that kind of stuff. Santa Barbara County, you see the same kind of thing, right? 10 million and up is down compared to the beginning of 2023. Small base though, right? So I think we had 7 homes close in January of 23 above 10 million. This year we had, I think, 1 close above 10 million in Santa Barbara. That's why that negative is so big. But outside of that, same story as you see in the rest of the state, right? Like 3 to 5 million essentially doing better than everywhere else, but a pretty solid rebound across the board. Pendings look really good, so I feel confident that February and March are going to look good. You had a lot of people pounce on those low rates at the end of January, beginning of February, and a lot of those folks went into escrow. Now, in fact, that translates to about a double-digit increase in pendings, meaning, again, February and March close should continue to follow my forecast, not would. So, haven't led you astray much yet. What you don't see is the new listings bouncing back. So this is how much we're putting onto the MLS every month. And you can see that we only put about 14,000 homes onto the market in January. That doesn't facilitate a super strong rebound in transactions. We're like barely replenishing what we're taking off every month, and that's why things are getting tighter, time on market's going down, stuff's becoming a lot more competitive. Buyers need to know that, right? Like listings are plateauing. As soon as those rates came down a little bit, sales popped back up, new listings didn't. Total active inventory is like flatlining there through the first 5 weeks of this year. That doesn't kind of portend well for all these price savings that you're going to get later this year that your brother-in-law told you about, right? We have less than 30,000 homes available for sale and rates that have come down about 100 basis points, even though they're kind of bouncing around 6.5%, 7%. Days on market probably peaked already. It usually does. January is like the slowest time of year, so days on market peaked probably about 35 days. That's already 7 days faster than last winter, right? So even though rates are higher now than they were back in January 23, the market's actually going quicker and starting to come back down as that spring home buying season heats up. So again, these fly in the face of those kind of suggestions that you should just wait, right? Because homes are selling quicker. You see that actually fewer and fewer sellers are having to reduce price. If you go back to the dead of winter when rates first jumped up, you were seeing 45% of active listings do a price reduction. Those numbers are falling. So as the demand picks back up, sellers are less willing to negotiate, not more. Guess what? Your brother-in-law just kind of led you astray. That's bad for you as a buyer. It's good news for you as a seller, but again, I think evangelizing for home ownership and just showing people what's actually happening, not what they're being told is happening. The headlines, super negative and depressing. The actual marketplace is picking right back up this year and getting competitive. In fact, last month was the 7th month in a row where prices were going up, not down, right? So everyone's so worried about picking out the perfect bottom for interest rates that they forget they're paying about 5 to 6% more for that same house, right, than they were last year, and prices are projected to continue to rise, and we see that month after month. The numbers in Santa Barbara show a similar thing, but they're much more volatile. Unfortunately, I put prices still on the upswing locally, star. The 2 asterisks are because A, we have a really small base of transactions, and so when Ellen buys a new house, it has like a dramatic impact on the overall median price, right? But also we have, Santa Maria as well. And so again, on a small base of transactions, if you get a surge in Santa Maria or a surge in Montecito, that's why you see such a volatile orange line relative to that statewide median price line. What I would focus on though is the peaks. Like last year, prices peaked during the heavy season, higher than they did even when rates were at 3%. So even though these kind of numbers are not super reliable from a statistical standpoint, in the sense that some of this is like an artifact of major big home selling or a big surge in Santa Maria and things like that. The general trend is still the same, right? That prices are rising, and in fact have been rising more and for longer than what you see even in the rest of the state, with those two caveats that we have been selling a lot of high-end homes that are probably dragging up that average just a little bit. But again, this is where I say the data can really be your friend on the sell side in particular. I think it's an amazing time to sell a house. We got a lot of people there who got used to that 3% rate environment and need to kind of come to grips with reality and learn to be strategic. Again, Lawrence Yun, the NAR chief economist, forecasted that divorce rates are going to start going down, because even if you hate your spouse, you love your mortgage, and you're like never going to sell your house ever again. I did a forecast event with him in San Jose I guess it was like right before Christmas, and I was like, respectfully disagree as somebody who's like recently divorced a couple of years ago. But I did like try and sell my house. I was like, this is just easier. I was like, even though I got a 3% rate, I'm gonna dump this house and I'll just pay her off that way and kind of ride off into the sunset and all of that. First thing she does is goes, yeah, let's sell it. I just looked on Zillow and it's worth $1.2 million. And our agent said, well, I looked at all the comps and I think we should put it on for like $960, $980. And she wasn't happy with that automatically right off the bat. She had like drank the Kool-Aid on this estimate. I was like, I actually know a guy who looks at this stuff, but so we put it on at like 980, something like that. It sits for like 30, 40 days because we put it on end of August, beginning of September, right when rates jumped from about 6 to 8%. Market dried up completely. So after 35 days, our agent says, you got to lower the price. I think we got to go down from like 980, 989 to 950, and my ex was livid, right? She's like, I can't do that. She's like, I already got that money spent, right? Even though it was like money on paper, she's like, my boyfriend's boat is already all picked out and ready to go. 90% have at least 30% home equity. That's relevant because even in that worst case scenario where prices fall 25%, that still leaves almost everybody in the black in California, unlike back in 2008-9, when almost everybody was upside down and you had no incentive, you had no skin in the game, as it were. Nobody joined my ex in spending out of home equity to buy their boyfriend's boats and RVs and stuff like that. Even though prices were way higher this time around, home equity lending was lower. So as a percentage, it was a lot lower, right? So just most of the equity still lives in the house. You don't have these ticking time bomb kind of 5-1 option arms that are going to blow up in our face. Again, 95% of people have either a 30 or even a 15-year fixed rate mortgage. Even if you lose your job, you're going to hang on to that because you're never going to find a better deal than that, loan that you have right now. Only idiots like me are walking away from a 3% loan. I told Lawrence, he forgets. I was like, those cheap rates can be very expensive, like psychologically, emotionally, but and that's why I think actually you'll end up seeing people move and inventory will improve. But ultimately, the other kind of final nail in the coffin for REOs is the fact that most everybody's paying their loan on time. So not only do I have a great mortgage at a super low rate with equity in the home that insulates me, but the bank's not even hounding me. 98% of people are paying their mortgages on time. That's like kind of strike 3 for your brother-in-law's email newsletter, which I highly encourage you to click unsubscribe on. And just remind buyers that housing always makes sense. It's not about what your brother-in-law says, buy and loan, sell and buy. You can mess around with Bitcoin or do whatever you want on that stuff. But long term, housing is the one thing that kind of pays. I would be printing this chart out and showing it to every employed renter that I know and just saying, do you want to be blue or do you want to be yellow? Because the people that own homes are the only ones with any wealth in this country. This is fresh data from the Federal Reserve that shows renters in 2022, it's an every 3-year survey. Renters were no better off in 2022 than they were in the 90s. Get active, remind folks that home ownership is what it's all about. The economy is going to be okay. It's not going to be great, but it's not going to be terrible. That's actually a good thing for inflation and a good thing for interest rates, especially for inventory, because as rates start to creep down, that's when you'll see some of those locked-in homeowners start to feel more willing to move, and I think that's the missing piece for generating more transactions. They've already started to rise over the last 3 months. We haven't gone up to about 320,000 units, so that's a 20% increase but it's still a fairly low level of transaction. So, you know, keep the champagne corked, keep your nose to the grindstone, really kind of step up to the plate in terms of bringing your A game for those consumers. And if you do that, sky's the limit. So thank you so much for that.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Jordan. That was really informative. And does your brother-in-law know that you speak so highly of him? That was, my brother-in-law is not that smart. Anyhow, really good. Okay, so commercial has been in the national headlines. We're going to talk today briefly on leasing, and there's different sectors: office, retail, industrial, and then we'll talk about sales. You're probably more interested. They go very much hand in hand for us. But the national headlines have not been kind to commercial, and there's some big issues nationally, primarily from the office sector and the debt that's coming due and some insolvency issues. Last week in Portland, there's an office building there, Montgomery Park. Portland's an extreme example because they have a lot of issues that have culminated. It sold in 2019 for $255 million. Downtown, front and center, beautiful building. It sold last week with only one bidder in foreclosure for $38 million. So you don't want to be the sponsor that put that deal together in 19, right? But that's an extreme example. In our market here, while we're certainly not, we're affected by national trends, certainly interest rates and all, but this market has held up much better. We don't have any drastic value. You know, people talk about buying, are there good opportunities here? It's always a relative thing. An opportunity here, I got to golf with a gentleman a couple weeks ago that has his fourth home here, and he's the 5th largest owner of mobile home parks in the country. And he's got stuff everywhere. And he said, hey, there's some opportunities. I said, well, tell me more about what an opportunity looks like for you and your group. And we just don't see those kind of opportunities here in terms of return, double-digit return, fire sale, foreclosures. In the last storm that we had, in the financial storm in 2008 and 9, we had 3 commercial foreclosures, and 2 of those the owners threw the keys back, so they were intentional. So we really have more of a well-heeled, long-standing, low leverage or no debt. And people own property in coastal California. You go up and down California, and you know, La Jolla, Laguna Beach, Carmel. People typically, you want to sell this beautiful building downtown and buy an AutoZone in Palmdale, and you can increase your return by 1 or 2%. It doesn't happen very often. So what does happen in a softer market, and we saw this last time as well, is that you now have an opportunity to buy what we would call core assets. The main location, the super high quality, the great tenant. In better markets, they just simply are not available. Now, once in a while, they're still expensive, but you can get to them. So, jumping in, try to get this going here. Okay, so leasing first, and there's always a lot going on with leasing. Retail in Santa Barbara, 2.5%. The national retail vacancy is between 5 and 6%. We thought back in the day of Amazon, retail is going away, and COVID, it's going away again. What's happened is retailers that have strong online presence have seen that they really need to exist with bricks and mortar. And so the footprints have shrunk. People are doing more with less space. Good example, Best Buy, 15 years ago, their model store was 25 to 30,000 square feet. Now it's to 10 to 12,000 feet. You don't have a big warehouse in the back, and it's basically just a showroom. That's a very consistent picture with most retailers. So we have less space, but we've held up much better than we thought we would with all some of the dire predictions. Now, downtown, nationally, we're doing a little bit better. And then you see the note there, downtown, 20% of vacant storefronts on State Street. So State Street's the face of commercial real estate. And quite frankly, it's probably over the years been less than 5 to 8% of our income, but it's what everyone talks about as the center of our town. We all know that it's not our finest hour. And 20% vacancy between Haley and Victoria, there's 249 storefronts, small, big, medium. 49 of them, about 1 out of 5, are currently vacant. So that's a problem, and there's not one silver bullet. We all have a lot of conversations. The city paid for a $90,000 report, told us some good things, then we commissioned almost $1 million report. We don't have the results back from that yet. I approached a few council members and said, where's this report that we all paid for? It's coming, we don't have it yet. That was over a year ago. So you look at downtown, and we all have our opinions on State Street. I mean, think about just on the market, 2.5%. Think about the waterfront, the funk zone, Montecito, Coast Village, there's nothing. Upper Village, Upper State Street, and Alton Cooper Plaza, different story there. But 5 Points, Gelson's, there's nothing available. So our retail has actually done pretty well. Downtown, with the vacancy there, I personally don't think that having that much street closed is working. And for COVID, we had all these massive patios. Our trade area is less than 200,000 people. So with the surrounding areas, the valley, and going to the outskirts, and including the college, that's not a big enough market to justify thousands of patio seats on State Street. I mean, we already had patios, wide sidewalks, we've got tons of space inside buildings. So I think personally, if I had the keys to the city, I would close 1, 2, maybe 3 blocks of State Street, 700-800 block where Paseo Nuevo is. Do an amazing job with the closure in the hardscape. I don't think it's a good use of space. We all have our opinions on that, but here's the thing. In the last few years, we'll go over a couple notable leases, and you won't see any retail leases. There's been a few smaller leases. We haven't seen any great headline new retail leases come to Santa Barbara, and it's not that big companies aren't doing leases. We haven't been attracting them. So the truest test of how we're doing downtown is if there's retail demand, and we're not seeing a whole lot of it. And that's what I just say to what everyone talks about, hey, let's keep it closed and let's throw hacky sacks on State Street and we'll picnic there and our kids will play on playgrounds. They're like, what? So it's not drawing new retail, and that's really what creates the experience that we all want to have on a Friday night or something like that. Okay, so moving on to office, whole nother subject here, and this really on the national headlines when you talk about office. Vacancy has never been higher in metro cities, in most cities, not the case in some exceptions, but Boston, Manhattan, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles, really tracking the highest vacancy we've ever had there. Santa Barbara is just at about 10%. In the last storm that we went through, we topped out about 9%. So we're not horrible. The national average is about 13.5% coast to coast. So we're a little bit better, but it's not where we want to be. You look at Goleta, it's 8%. Carpinteria, you see there 27%. Carp's super small, so you could have 2 new listings come on and then the rate goes way up. It's a really small market, so we're not too worried about that. So the office conversations that we've had, especially during COVID, is do we need office anymore? And there was a survey done in 2022, and it found that 34% of companies said, no more office, we're out, we don't need offices. Same survey in 23, 1% said we don't need offices. So now what's happened, I think what's here to stay is the hybrid work model. But think about how we're wired as people. I'm not very productive sitting in a room by myself alone all day on the phone or computer. It's not how we're wired. So we're really people have found there's just more productivity, creative thoughts when you're together. So people are coming back to the office, and it's certainly not going away. But it has reduced, COVID, bottom line is COVID hasn't been kind to the office sector. LA, 20% vacancy, San Francisco, 35% vacancy. I talked to a gentleman I did a deal with years ago that has a huge portfolio in San Francisco. A couple weeks ago, he bought something here, and I said, Martin, how's everything going in San Francisco? We read the headlines, and he said, Brad, whatever headlines you read, he said, it's worse. And I was just, really disheartening. There have been a few AI-related leases and companies that have leased space in San Francisco. That's the little bright spot recently. Keep in mind in these large metro areas that have these issues with crime and really just not a business-friendly environment. In LA, there's companies that have workshops where if you work at the company, you're gonna go to a workshop to learn how to safely enter and exit the building every day. And it's such an issue. So that's a bottom line. We need to provide a clean, safe environment, and crime is out of control in some of those metro areas. That's really when you hear about national real estate issues, it's really the debt on those big buildings. If you have vacancy up, rates are down, and now the 5% loans coming due and it's now 8%, the debt coverage ratios, it doesn't work. And so there's a real insolvency problem. You'll hear more about it this year. Industrial, not a whole lot to talk about. That's the sweetheart nationally and locally. And there's just, for over 10 years, we've been below 1% in Santa Barbara. There's not that much of it here. Goleta and Carp, we don't have any real new meaningful projects to speak of. So, notable vacancies, we talked about office, and this is really the area of concern. The Procore building, top left, 50,000 feet, that's where Veneco was. That building looks at the ocean, no takers, and they'll divide it. That's a sublease from Procore. They shed some space and moved some of their operations to Austin. Inogen vacated this big building, Bolay. Staples, there's reality churches there downtown, but no long-term tenants for 17,000 feet. CVS left State Street. Not that CVS creates this great experience, but it saddens me to see, I mean, when I talk anything negative about the town, I raised my family here, this is our home, but some of these things, when you have McDonald's, Subway, Verizon, CVS leaving downtown, it's not a great sign. So we've got 14,000 feet to fill there. A lot of people talk about, hey, we'll just have pop-ups everywhere. Well, pop-ups are great. They're not the reason you're going to go downtown to really create a shopping experience. They keep the lights on. They can also be gone tomorrow. We need long-term tenants to really come make an investment, and that's the ultimate sign of how we're doing, in my opinion. Top right, this building tells a story. You can't really see the building that well. Behind Fleer and Deckers, 45,000 square feet, bought by a local investor. Building was leased up to multiple tenants, sold at a 6.5 cap several years ago. 6.5 cap, Santa Barbara, great return. At the time, it seemed like a good deal at $12.75 million. So just under $13 million. The building is on the market today for $9.75 million, vacant. And so all the tenants left, government contractors left in that market. And that's purely office. That's where the issue is, large, pure office. If you don't have the opportunity to do industrial there, no roll-up door on the back and that kind of thing, it's not easily convertible to anything but office. And so that's really where, that's probably the most extreme example of a value swing in Santa Barbara County. Most buildings have held up relatively well. One more slide of notable vacancies. Bottom, Sonos, they were in 5 buildings downtown. New ownership came in and said, let's roll up into one building in Goleta, and they rolled up into a building that Inogen was in. And then top here, this is a longer conversation. We lost our anchors downtown. We lost Nordstrom's and we lost Macy's. And Jim Scarborough doesn't know where to buy his socks anymore, but I told him I could help out with that online later. So he was terrorizing me before this coming up here. So Macy's, that's part of Paseo Nuevo Mall, and that went on the block for sale. Now, mind you, the mall is owned by the city. The big portions of the mall, Nordstrom's, on ground leases. There's just over 40 years left on a ground lease. Macy's, they were marketing as large format office space. We're not going to have, again, small trade region, under 200,000 people, we're not going to have 100,000 square foot tenants come to town. So those days are gone. We've got to look at repositioning the building or redeveloping them. A little frustrated with the city, and I've talked to you over the years, and I've heard just a lot of, well, we're going to wait and see what happens. You have the ground lease underneath. If they're more proactive, again, these are the parts of our downtown to ignite, not sit and watch slowly die. And we can give them longer leases, negotiate a 75-year or 100-year lease, or even sell it. They're no longer critical to our city function. Sell the property, get some money, and then an investor can spend $100 million and build a really beautiful apartment village at Macy's. They're not going to spend $100 million when they're giving the keys back on a ground lease in 40 years. Nordstrom's was bought by a group of investors for $14 million. They gutted it for $2 million, and they've been sitting marketing for office. Well, office is not great right now, so they don't have any takers, especially large format takers like that. But we really need to be proactive as a city, and I think housing, especially for the Macy's portion, makes a ton of sense. You talk, everyone, hey, let's make it housing, let's make it hotels. So in that discussion has come up a lot with office as well. We have too much office in the United States. Let's just make it all housing. Nationally, a report was done, and they found that only 1 in 10 buildings is it feasible to actually do a conversion. When you figure the cost of converting the window lines, if you think about Nordstrom's and Macy's, there's these big open floor plates. You don't have exiting. They're not designed for that kind of thing, so it's better to really tear them down and start over. And that's happening a lot nationally when that discussion where, hey, we've got all this office space, let's just make it into residential. It's really a challenge and not quite as easy as you might think. Okay, notable leases, some good news here. Toyon and Goleta, they lease an additional 37,000 square feet in Goleta, government contractor, that's great news. Downtown Geosyntech, that's the old Wells Fargo building, and that's a growing company. Cornerstone, a medical device company. Umbretta downtown, they have a huge amount of space in the old Brooks Institute building on Coda, and then they lease what was the Logic Monitor space on State Street. So those are all great, but again, No significant retail leases to talk about. Okay, into sales, and try to stay on time here. So for years, about 2/3 of our market was dominated by owner-occupant sales, and that was probably 5 or 6 years. Now owner-occupant sales in the last couple of years, particularly 23, was about 1/3, maybe 40% of our market. In the fourth quarter, and this, okay, so we've got roughly, 150 some odd people. You see the total sales for 23 was 72, so we each get just share a sale for last year. But fortunately, there's only a couple dozen people that are full-time in commercial, but it's definitely not as much of we don't have as big a field as you all do. So 72 sales for 23. The volume associated that was 239 million. And then you see in 2022, we had 129 sales, but the volume was 615 million. So my wife was much happier with the paychecks in 22 than 23. We paid the bills last year, but it's been difficult, and interest rates have a huge impact. We're largely in an unemotional sector. If an investor says, well, hey, if I'm gonna buy that 6 cap and I'm gonna borrow money at 7.5, that doesn't work, that's negative leverage. Typically, someone wants to buy a 6 cap, they wanna get 6% financing. So it's been a standoff between the sellers and the buyers, and again, our ownership profile here, they're not typically anxious sellers. Let's see what else. So the 15-year average sale trend is 84 sales a year. So I think this next year will probably be below that again. And then some notable sales, there's a little story behind each one. Google, Techtopia, and Goleta. That's great news for our market. High-paying jobs, a lot of PhDs coming out of UCSB. They bought a piece of land that was approved for about a 100,000 foot building. Giordano's bought it. They decided not to expand because of the business climate. They sold it to an investor. That investor snuck in there and made 7 figures and sold it to Google and never built a building. That's always a good position. So Google's going to build their 5th building, and it'll be a complete technology Shangri-La. They're doing a lot of AI and quantum physics and things I don't understand anything about. We had a little hotel sale at Colonel Mar for $9 million. Top right, and I appreciate what Trudy Carey was saying, she's a great operator. This beautiful building that was sold, part of it was sold to Investec they sold condominiums. They sold about 30,000 feet of a 70,000 foot building and mapped the existing building, and it also came with a lot of land for future residential development. You look at this building and think, well, it's got to be condos or beautiful offices. It's going to be mini storage downtown. And so Investec, they have a storage facility in Goleta. And you ask why such a beautiful, prominent building? Well, it's a little funky how it's broken up inside, but the conversion costs of storage, very inexpensive. Offices, this is really a tired building on the inside. And then if you were to do residential, there's a huge cost there. So that's what's feasible. Also with mini storage, rent control and the continual, it seems like every week you got to become an expert on how things are working in the rental environment. Bottom right, that was a sale of that was a furniture store sold to the Housing Authority for $5 million. That's going to be affordable housing. This slide, the top left, everyone's asking, well, what are cap rates in Santa Barbara? And again, we have very little, we don't have enough data to really say what's happened with the higher interest rates. This is a little building, the primary tenant was a vet, and 6.14 cap in Santa Barbara is pretty good. A couple years ago, you couldn't touch a 6+ cap here. So this, I would suggest that the commercial market in general, our cap rates would be somewhere in the low 5s to the mid 6s. But we're not seeing 7 and 8s like other markets, and I don't think we will. We didn't last time either. Let's see. So bottom left, owner user sale, little industrial building. That owner user had the ability to write a check, so that was nice. The small building in the middle here that Mort was in I was talking to, was in this for decades, and a really charming little office building, a little tired, but a nice building. A couple bought it at a good price, and it's zoned for residential. Kind of looks like a little apartment building. You think, how much sense does that make? Here's a property with patios, parking, zoning, single level. They're going to make it a 4-plex. In the city, I mean, isn't this something that the city would get right behind? They closed on it. I talked to them the other day, and they said, hey, we are dying. We had a complete application for a 4-plex in September, and we're nowhere. The goalpost is fuzzy. The city's not telling us exactly what we need to do. And And they're just this young couple, and they're just getting hammered by our city process. Again, love the town, but we have such a bad reputation, I can't defend it. I see tenant improvements all the time with little ADA or issues, and the city just opens this bucket of regulation. And a lot of the regulation that they're basically applying, they don't even understand themselves. And it's really out of hand. And I would just suggest that the delays and this excessive regulation, in my opinion, I'm all for meaningful, let's protect this great town. We're not talking about blowing it out, but it is so hard to do anything here. All the investors talk, that doesn't lead to prosperity. It doesn't help anybody, in my opinion, in the town. So that's an example, just kind of a sore spot, and hopefully they'll end up okay on that. Bottom right was the little building where Rox was. Sunglass Hut, that owner bought that at a pretty good price, and he's going to map the building, so convert to condos upstairs and commercial condos downstairs, and probably make a few bucks. Top right, big deal. Steve Brown, a partner of mine, he's retired, or he says he's retiring. We finished a little lease in El Mercado last year, just a little small office lease. I said, well, Steve, you're retiring, you need to drop the mic on the lease in El Mercado. And he said, no, I got something else I'm working on. So he sold this with a couple of guys in our company for $19 million, a big deal. This is a whole block. This is Yananali, Gray, and Mason. The previous application here from the previous owner was going to do a 3 to 4 story mixed use project. And everyone kind of went nuts, it's too big and all this sort of thing. So he's going to take the existing buildings, and this is the same developer that did the Lark and Lucky Penny, and really did a nice job. They're going to take this collective, you got houses, Quonset huts, industrial buildings, little office building, one of everything on the property, and he's going to make a significant investment and make it just a little boutiqueville kind of in the funk zone, and I think it'll be a really nice bright spot for our waterfront. Okay, wrapping up. So looking ahead to 24, industrial is going to remain strong. We actually continue to see a little pricing increase in industrial just based on scarcity. Lease rates have gone up for over a decade, and there's some cases where industrial lease rates are higher than office or retail rates. I think that's going to stabilize, but it's all supply and demand. And anyhow, that sector is strong. Retail is going to see cap rate pressure to go up. Again, lots of different types of retail. If you have a freestanding long-term lease building on Coast Village Road, you can name your price. If you have a vacant building in the 900 block of State Street, different story. So we're going to see some pressure in the retail sector. Unfortunately, as much as I'm an optimist, I don't see downtown being noticeably different at the end of the year. And I'm not sure that what we're doing, we're spending $11 million widening the sidewalk underneath the freeway overpass. $11 million, we could have put some really nice lighting in there. Anyhow, so appreciate everyone serving the city, but I'm not sure about some of the decisions. Office sales will remain flat. Really where the issue is locally with office, the large format. If you own a 100,000 foot or 50,000 foot vacant office building, you're going to take a hit if you sell it. Smaller buildings in town, the bread and butter, the 4, the 5, 6,000 foot buildings, they've held up historically much better. And relatively low commercial inventory. The opportunistic buyers, the gentleman that said, hey, the opportunity is here and I can cut a check for huge amounts of money tomorrow for a deal, we're not going to see. The deals are always relative to what is a coastal California city. We're not going to see, there'll be some deals, but they're not the type of deals that fit the matrix of some of these larger institutions or investors that do stuff nationally. And then transaction-wise, I think we'll be below average. And what do they say, stay alive to 25, but we're optimistic, we're doing business, but we definitely, it's a bit of a slog, and hopefully that's helpful for you all.
Hi everybody. So I'll just jump in. I am part of our team, Karen, and Lindsay Jones is here too. She's the most amazing team member. She does our marketing. She did all these slides, so thank you for that. So Karen used to be known as the condo queen, but really we represent a wide variety of properties, all the way from a 1-bedroom condo up to a 100-acre ranch and everything in between. So for the purpose of today, we offer a big spectrum. So I started the beginning of the year asking a lot of you what you thought, one word that comes to mind when you think of the 2024 real estate market. And I got a lot of really good responses. Some of you were a little bit negative. We had some repeat of 2023, sluggish, stagflation. Some of you were a little bit more like middle of the road, normalized, unknown, balanced, stable. But for the majority, you guys were all pretty positive about the market and what we were going to see this year. We had lots of good words like resurgent and busy and optimistic and interesting. So while we don't really know what the market's going to hold this year, I think it's really helpful to kind of get a bird's eye view and look back at where we've come. So when I first started in real estate, 2005, but it was kind of a similar market to COVID, where buyers were writing offers on the hoods of their car. There was 100% financing. It was kind of a frenzy of a market. Then 2008 hit. It was the market crashed, and it was the start of the Great Recession. 2012 was about the bottom of the market. We experienced a lot of short sales and foreclosures. That was fun. And then in 2014, we hit kind of like a normal market where we had normal appreciation year over year. And we rode that for a while until COVID hit. And I call this the Great Disruptor because it really changed our industry. In the COVID market, as crazy of a time as that was, we actually thought it was a very predictable real estate market. We knew how to talk to our buyers and sellers and say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, if you price your house right here, you're going to get 10 offers and you're going to be in the driver's seat. Or Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, there's going to be 18 offers on this property, so you got to come in with your escalation clause, remove all your contingencies. And we were really good at getting deals done. We all worked really well in that market together. Then in June of 2022, the foot came off the accelerator and all of us went, wait, what's happening? The market wasn't crashing, but it was definitely not going as fast. And then that was really reflected in the 2023 real estate market, where we saw the increased rates, decreased demand, decreased supply, and it was really, really unpredictable. Sometimes Karen and I didn't know which way was up. We would price a condo or a house and think it would get multiple offers, and it got nothing. A couple stories of unpredictable. You guys remember this house? I had so many of you call and say, what in the world is happening with this house? Gorgeous. We put it on the market in June of 2022, right when the foot came off the accelerator. And we listed it at $4,995,000, got tons of great feedback. We had an offer within the first week, and that's when everybody was starting to feel maybe that slowdown, and so the first buyer got cold feet and she canceled escrow within a week. And then it sat on the market for a couple of months, and lots of showings, but nobody wrote. We had a price reduction. We got back into escrow with somebody, I think at about 4.5. And that buyer had a house to sell. And we thought, well, the sellers can be patient, so they decided to take that offer. We waited for a few months. Unfortunately, her house fell out of escrow, and so we came back on the market again. This whole listing was about 1.5 years long. But by the end, out of nowhere, we got multiple offers, and it ended up selling over our original asking price at $5 million. Unpredictable. At the lower end of the spectrum, we had a Pacific Oaks condo that all of the data said price it at $775,000. That's what the comps led to, but Karen and I kind of knew the market was a little bit unpredictable. So we said, you know what, be aggressive with your price. They came on at $749,000. We staged it, we painted it, we did all the things we know that would work, and nothing. No offers. And finally, after about a month, Caitlin came in and sold it, but at $725,000. So we were shocked that it sold for the price it did. So we were all filled with market opinions. I love the brother-in-law effect. That's exactly it. Everybody's doctor and tennis partner had an opinion about the market. They said the market's going to crash and prices are going to fall. Well, really in Carpinteria to Goleta, prices only came down 2% last year. And 40% of Americans nationally, homeowners, own their homes free and clear. Now that might not be right after Jordan Levine, because I think he said something about 30%. I wish he would have gone after all of us. They said that we're heading into a recession. Everybody was saying that. And really, in actuality, the economy grew by 2.5%, and we have a pretty good economy. There's an article that just came out that says no matter how good our economy is right now, people just aren't having it. They're not buying it. They're really suspicious of what's going on. They said that no one will buy with 7 or 8% interest rates. So while in fact our units were down by 22%, I don't think we can completely blame interest rates for that. We are definitely in an inventory crisis, and that was a big tribute to it. And I actually feel really good because Jordan used the same slide. Look at the historical rates over the decades. While a 6 or 7% interest rate compared to a 3% interest rate was kind of a smack in the face for some people, historically, a 6 and 7% interest rate is actually pretty normal. So we all know in this room that people buy and sell because of the 5 Ds: diamonds, diapers, diploma, death, divorce, and in Santa Barbara, I would even say destination. I was gonna make the same joke about the divorce, that somebody's not gonna let like a 1.5% interest swing be the deciding factor if you're gonna sell your house and get a divorce. But my husband told me not to say that, but Jordan did. So I won't talk about this much, but it is something that might be on people's minds. It is an election year, and Jordan, I talked to him earlier, and he and Randy Freed say there's no correlation between the real estate market and an election year. But there was a study that I always think about that goes back to 1963, and they said that nationally speaking, the market usually slows down about 9.8% in the fall. And during an election year, it slows down about 15%. So might there be a slowdown in Santa Barbara this year in the fall? Ours is typically more like 5%. I'm not sure. It depends what happens with the election, but I don't really think we're gonna see too big of an impact. So for 2024, I think we're gonna maybe come a little bit out of that unpredictable phase and go into, our big things are going to be inventory, insurance issues, but I do think I'm pretty optimistic about the market that once rates do start coming down, we're going to see a lot more buyers and we're going to see prices go up again. So statistically, this is January, this shows the inventory crisis that we're in. So when you look at I don't know how to use the little thing on here, but when you look at 2018, that's more of a normal inventory supply. And so you can see down in the COVID years, they were super low, but that's because everything was being absorbed as fast as they came on. But we still have quite a bit of an inventory crisis. You can see how low we are. So this is January. I'm not giving anybody the middle finger, that's just showing up. This is January this year over last year, and as you can see, everything is up, so things are moving. For single family homes, the median sales price was up 36% over the January before, and 2.5% for condos. Listings are up 25% and 62% for condos. And what's interesting is days on the market is also up. So while Jordan was saying it's down compared to the COVID market, compared to last January, days on the market is up a little bit. So there's still a little bit of a hesitancy with the buyer demand. Homes are sitting a little bit longer on the market. And sales price to list price ratio is basically even from where it was last January, but I would think that that number is also gonna go up quite a bit once the rates come down and the market picks up maybe this summer. So this was the news that came out in January that I think everybody felt. The Fannie Mae's vice president came out and said that mortgage rates are going to dip below 6% by the end of 2024, and there was a little bit of a frenzy in January. So with this news, there was a huge increase in loan applications. I called about 5 different lenders in town and said, what's going on for you? And they all said, I'm up like 15% over last year. Somebody said I'm up over like 300% over last year. So buyers were listening to the news and are jumping back in and doing their homework at least to get ready to buy. And we have to remember that this new pool of buyers that we have now are not the same pool of buyers that were looking at the 3% interest rates. So they're not as surprised by these rates. They're already kind of used to them. We're closing an escrow this week, and our buyer, I said, what did you end up locking your rate in? And he said 7.125, and he was stoked on that. So we have to not be the ones who are saying these rates are terrible. So far, though, the rates really haven't budged. This is just different data points throughout January and February that show, they're just kind of ticking up and down, but no real trend yet. So let's look at some trends that we're seeing so far. It seems like multiple offers are back, at least they were in January. Cathedral Oaks, this was Diane and Brianna Johnson's listing, and even though it was on a busy street, they priced it really aggressively, and they had 18 offers, and it sold, I think 15% over asking price. Miramonte, this was Aaron Chadwick's listing, and they had 10 offers. That was a lot of house for the price. That's still in escrow, but I imagine they're going to go quite a bit over asking. The condos, this is Jessie Sessions' listing. This was interesting. She probably would have priced it a little bit higher, but her client was a realtor up in the Bay Area, and their strategy up there is to price it a little bit lower and get that mad rush of people. And so they had 5 offers, and she said that'll be closing, I think, somewhere closer to like $1,250,000, which is where she thought that it was going to be it would sell. And then this was Scott Williams' Barling Terrace. This was one of the few 3 bedrooms out there. And he was really smart. He priced it just under the last 3-bedroom sale, and he got 5 offers on that as well. What's not selling, these are based on actual properties that are not selling, but the listing agents did not want me to highlight them. I don't blame them. So Lindsay found some more generic photos. But things that are on busier streets, even though theirs on Cathedral Oaks did get multiple offers, in COVID days, anything sold. Foothill, Kyriel, it could be on an off-ramp and they would sell. But now it's less easy to sell things on a busy street. Challenging access, we've got a few really steep driveways, something on the Riviera with a shared driveway that's just got difficult access. These are the comments that these agents are getting from buyers. Poor condition, you know, a lot of the recartivations, that's what we call them in our office, like people coming in doing really big beautiful remodels, those are the things that are attracting buyers. With the higher interest rates, buyers can't really necessarily afford to do the work on a home anymore, and so they're looking for something that is a little bit more move-in ready. And then, of course, buyers are still definitely price sensitive because of the interest rates. There's a perfectly lovely home in Rancho San Antonio, and the agents, it's just sitting there, and the agent said, you know, buyers are saying that the price that I've got here, even though the comps all support it, they're not feeling it for the neighborhood. So insurability, this is going to be a huge theme of 2024. I talked to our in-house lender, Teresa, at Home Services, and Kelly Weiser, and they were really helpful in painting a picture of what's going on. 93108 is the most challenging zip code to insure right now. Anything over Foothill, over the 192, that's in high fire, is obviously going to be California Fair Plan, and I'm sure you are all experiencing how challenging that is right now with 3 weeks till you even get a word from them. Surplus companies are helping, especially in Montecito. Non-California companies are coming in and are helping us out. And Kelly Weiser wanted to encourage, I think she's here, she wanted to encourage everybody that each week we're getting more and more companies that are coming in that will insure these, so that we shouldn't be too down with our stories that we're hearing. But really right now, insurability is determined by 3 main things that weren't necessarily the case before. Occupancy, it's a lot more challenging to get insurance on a non-primary residence. Condition, and I'll give you a story about that after. Properties that are fixers that we used to be able to get insurance on, no problem. Those are probably looking at California Fair Plan right now. And property type, believe it or not, condos are really hard to insure. And so a lot of condo associations, HOAs are going up. I'm sure you're hearing from your clients that their HOA fees went up. It's because they're having a really hard time getting insurance. So this is a duplex over on San Pasqual, listed by David Kim and sold by Chris Smith. And there were 2 amazing agents that got to work together on this, and they worked really well because they coached their clients to stick with this. But this property is not in a flood zone or a high fire, and they had a really, really hard time getting insurance on it because of the condition of the property. Chris is a wealth of knowledge now. He's got lots of information. He's gone through this a few times. But on this one, they ended up having to go California Fair Plan on a small little duplex on the west side because the roof was old, the single pane windows, and all of the systems were old. And so they were really late closing escrow, and so they did a good job of coaching their clients through it, but they did get it done. Income units. Last year, income units were really hard. John Standrine, I felt like, was my own personal real estate advisor when it came to multi-unit, because the data that pointed to how you should price a property was really pointless. It was not helpful. It was not what the buyers and investors were looking for. So the first listing there was Karina's listing, and it was vacant, which is, you'd think would be a lot easier to sell. But she attributed, it sold, I can't remember, 87% of list price on a vacant property in a great neighborhood, because she attributed it to high interest rates. She said all of the buyers, investors and owner users that were looking at it just couldn't make it pencil out. Our triplex with the 4th unit on Solo Street sat for a long time. Again, all the data looked at like $2,450,000 as a sales or a list price, and we sold it for $1,850,000. And we had a lot of people call after saying they were kicking themselves for not just coming in with a lower offer. I don't know that he would have taken it right off the bat, but the main reason for that was the condition. One of the buildings was from 1890, and it was just old, and buyers knew that it was going to be a lot of work to update. And then finally, this poor one, Caitlin had this listed on Palermo, and they listed it that they had month-to-month tenants in there who were all low on under market rent. And so when like a few days before they put this on the market at $1,650,000, the owner called them and said, "Surprise, I just locked everyone in for a year lease at these super low rents." And that just completely made it a challenge to sell. And it ended up selling at $1,267,000. So yeah, buyers really want income units. So we've looked at the few income units that have sold so far this year, and it looks like sellers are getting a little bit closer to their asking price based on a few of the sales. The buyer pool out there is a lot of owner user. There's people who want to get in there and have another unit to help them pay their mortgage payment. There's less 1031 exchanges out there because investors just aren't confident that they're going to be able to identify another property within the 45 days. And people definitely don't want to inherit tenants with all the strict laws. So what's happening in our neighborhoods? Just really quickly, I looked at 2023 versus 2022 and spoke with some of the agents who specialize in those areas. And I think that comparing those neighborhoods to Santa Barbara, where Santa Barbara saw about a 2% decrease in median sales price and a 22% decrease in number of sales, San Roque had a little bit bigger of a hit in number of sales at 32%, according to Bob Curtis. And Chris Palme on the Riviera said that they had about a 10% decrease in median sales price. So most of the neighborhoods were pretty much in line with the greater area, but it's interesting to look at the specific neighborhoods too. So what's up in 2024? Who do we think our sellers are? It looks like we've got a lot of trust sales, so people who are selling mom and dad's house that they inherited, maybe mom and dad passed away, people who are going into assisted living, or maybe just downsizing into a single level home. We just had our Gregory Way condo, that was 2 stories. They sold that to buy a single level home in San Roque, and a house on the Mesa that was multi-level that ended up buying a single level house as well. We've got a lot of people moving out of state. Arizona seems to be a big place, Tennessee, Florida, we've had a few clients go to those places. And people who are just kind of simplifying and selling things and moving into one of their properties. Our buyers right now are continuing to be people that work remotely, which we saw a lot during the COVID times. A lot of people who their jobs are flexible, they can work from home, and so of course they want to come to the beach. We've got some people deciding between Telluride and Santa Barbara, and that's such a big difference, but they truly want to get to the beach. And people trying to get out of big cities. I think, was it Brad who was just talking about crime, and people learned a lot through COVID and want to get out of big cities and into safer places. We are seeing less buy-ups. It's harder for people who've maybe bought a condo and always planned on buying a single family home. That's a little bit more challenging. They've got these really low interest rates and prices have gone up, and so it's hard for them to make that transition, so a lot of people are staying put. And of course, we always have our first-time home buyers. So for 2024, I do think we're gonna see more buyers come out based on the loan applications that we've seen and the maybe somewhat good media that we're getting. I think inventory is continuing to be tight this year, so that's gonna be one of our biggest hurdles. And because of that, I think once rates come down and later in the year, spring, fall, we're gonna actually have a really busy year and prices will start to rise. So we're telling all of our buyers, get ahead of it, get in now, and you can always refinance later.
So I just want to start off by saying I'm so excited to speak with all the great realtors in Santa Barbara. I've managed the portfolio of a lot of clients throughout different regions in California. I'm from Santa Barbara. My family's been here since the late 1890s, so this is what I call home. But the good thing about working in different regions is I gather a lot of data and information, and I get the pulse of people in different areas. But what I will say is the realtors in Montecito and Santa Barbara, I've dealt with some of the top agents in LA, and the agents here are some of the best anywhere. They're extremely skilled, extremely ethical. I know that I have a group of agents in Montecito that we're constantly speaking, and We alert each other if other people are taking our clients or whatever. We really protect each other, and it's great. It's a really special place for that. So I'm going to dive right in. So early 2024, I would say there's green shoots happening. There's optimism. There's higher call volume. A lot of I base a lot of my information I share with my clients on how busy my phone is. I'll say that when interest rates dropped briefly in late January, my phone was going crazy. It felt like 2021 again. And then I spoke with Steve Mazes, who's one of the top brokers, mortgage brokers at Countrywide yesterday. And he said that even the perception of a drop in interest rates picks up the call volume, picks up the sales, picks up the mortgage volume. So it's even the perception of a drop in interest rates is really helpful. In Montecito, I would say that recently, for things that are happening on and off market, ultra high-end sales are starting to happen. And that's happening in different regions as well. But you had the sale on Park Lane for $37 million. You have another sale that just closed off market for $35 million. You have multiple offers on the property on Romero that was listed at $25 million. So the ultra high end is trading very actively. What's selling in this market? Properties that are finished, properly priced. I would say it's much more price sensitive. In the ultra high end, I don't know if it matters as much, but I would say from 4 to 15 million, there's a lot of price sensitivity. I would say that if you're within 5% of the target range, you'll get a lot of activity in sales. So looking back, in 2021, there's 284 sales above 4 million. 2022, there was 213 sales above 4 million. And last year, there was 167. A lot of that had to do with the lack of inventory and people not wanting to trade out of their low interest rate loans. But I would say that I'm going to jump into a case study from this year where I'm seeing more activity. This sale just happened, 172 Santa Elena. I went to this open house, and with a lot of brokers, and for that neighborhood, we were all saying 8.5 was a stretch. And Josiah proved us wrong. He got 8.470 in a neighborhood that I don't know if there had been trades far above $5 million in the past. But what the house had was amenities. It was a great house for a family. It was finished, move-in ready. It had the pool. It had, everything a family would want, which is not as easy to find as you would think. This is another case study for something that just traded off market. 319 San Isidro Road. This hit the this traded last year for $22 million in an off-market sale, and Ellen redid it. She's a magician. She redid it beautifully, and it just traded for $35 million off market for 8-acre property. But if you look at this, to get 8 acres on San Isidro Road is pretty mind-boggling. I mean, the home was basically a 3-bedroom home, but to get 8 acres in that location below East Valley is pretty special. So I think ultra high-end buyers are recognizing special properties. I think the buyer-seller psychology is getting a little closer. Seller expectations have been unrealistic coming out of 2021 and 2022. They saw their friends sell their houses at ridiculous prices quickly, and I think they're starting to see that they can't just put their house on the market, not stage it properly, not fix the things that need to be fixed, and get a record-breaking price. It just doesn't happen right now. So you need to come into the market with your home completely prepared to sell, things painted, furnished beautifully, everything that set up so that it'll inspect really well, and price it on the money. And when you do that, it's very successful. We had a trade last year in Summerlin, that we had a broker price opinion. Everyone said come in at 4.2. We went more aggressive because the house was so beautifully prepared and staged. We came in at 3.95. It traded for 4.6 with multiple offers. So that was just a sign of hitting the market ultra prepared with the right price. Buyers are more cautious, more price sensitive, and more specific in what they want. Gen Z buyers, which there's a lot of right now, they tend to be more pragmatic in their purchases and analyze it. They're the generation that's grown up going on Yelp and Google reviews and doing their research. So a lot of times they come in just as informed as the agents. They've been studying the market for years. And the agents in this area are very, very knowledgeable about the inventory. So you're not gonna trick anyone by overpricing a house right now. You have to come in with the correct price and that property ready to sell. External influences are huge in the mass exodus from big cities to secondary markets like Montecito, Santa Barbara, Aspen, Malibu, Park City, all these places where people moved from during the pandemic and have taken up permanent residence as their primary residence. In LA, taxes, homelessness, crime, the ULA mansion tax is huge. It basically shut down the high end of the LA market. So that's a 5% on tax on properties above $5 million. And you're talking about you have a $10 million property, you're spending an extra $5 million or $500,000 in the transaction. So it really put a halt on that market. Young families are now prioritizing lifestyle. They want a healthier lifestyle. They're more about experience than they were in the past. They don't care as much about having the biggest house. They want to have the best lifestyle, and they want to enjoy the house they have they want to have a gym, they want to have a pool, they want to have all the amenities so they could just hunker down and be in that house, have homeschooling if they need to. Those are the things that are really important. I think that Montecito has this huge cachet now. You've had a lot of high-end buyers come in, and I remember like 5 years ago, I was talking to an agent in LA, and he's like, "Where is Montecito?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's like an hour and a half away." And he's like, "I thought that was next to San Francisco." I was like, just people had no idea. But now it's like people are foregoing places like Malibu to come to Montecito, and it's just such a better lifestyle. So people realize that now. We have a big election coming up. It's going to get a little weird towards the end of the year, but at the same time, we all kind of expect that to happen. And half the people are going to be happy, half the people are going to be sad, no matter what happens. So, people still need to live somewhere. Stock market's been very positive. Geopolitical influences and war. So I had a house in escrow for $30 million. Contingencies were going to release a day from the day the person pulled out of escrow. And that was the day that everything broke out in Israel. And he pulled out. And there was a number of stories like that I heard that especially when everything happened in the Middle East, a lot of people were backing away. I'd say a lot of those people are coming back now, but all these influences are going to be huge this year. Homes that sell, scarcity. End of last year, a house traded for $47 million on Padaro. Unbelievably beautiful house, unbelievably beautiful location, and to be honest, I think it was a great buy. I showed that property 2 times, and to both people, I was like, you should buy this. You're not gonna find much better along the coastline in this area. Location, the big trades are happening in the best locations. The big sale on Park Lane for $37 million with the 2 properties recently. Big estate property, views, beautiful grounds. Those properties are really hard to find. Renovated, recently staged homes, we've already talked about that, but people want to be move-in ready, especially Gen Z buyers. They really want to just take their toothbrush, land, and make their experience really easy. Factors for stagnation. Pricing sensitivity. This is a price-sensitive market. You have to price things correctly. Objections increase exponentially when a house is overpriced. I've seen what I would say is 10% above the value of the house. People are breaking down the size of the primary bedroom. They're breaking down the street noise. They're breaking down, the kitchen countertops. When the house is priced correctly, those houses go into contract immediately with sometimes no contingencies. And I've had experiences where people walk in the house when the furniture's out and they're like, is this the same house? What did I just buy? It happens though. Once again, coming out of the gate with pricing that creates urgency. Preferred design elements. Provenance with modern upgrades is really popular. If you can find like a 1920s Spanish that's been redone, that's one of the most requested styles that I experience. And that, especially in Montecito, that's the kind of Montecito dream property for most of my buyers, and they're really hard to come by. The Ellen effect. I mean, she's been incredibly successful with flipping high-end homes. I mean, she had the house 848 Hot Springs. She bought it for $20 million, renovated it, made it look incredibly cool, put cool art, put cool furniture. She blended period and modern aesthetics together, which is such an amazing combination in this market. That's what people want. Family-friendly homes with updates in the last 2 to 3 years. 5 years ago is not new. Like, people don't perceive that as recently updated. So they really want something updated in the last couple years. Amenities that are selling: pools, auxiliary structures, and enhanced security features are really important, especially for buyers that are coming from bigger cities right now. I had a client who bought a really expensive home in Montecito, and I went over to his house, and he had 3 security guards in front of the house, and like these giant security vans everywhere. I was like, this is not the situation here. You cannot have this outside of your house. I grew up and we literally didn't know where our key is for 35 years. So this is, but people come in with a lot of fear of what they've experienced in robberies. So when they come here, they're still on high alert. So enhanced security features are a huge thing people talk about. What's trending? There's an article in Vogue about quiet luxury. There's a lot of people that are shopping. They're buying expensive shoes, they're buying expensive clothing without all the labels on them, but they know what they are. It's the quiet luxury, wink, wink, I know what you're wearing kind of thing. The same applies to real estate. People are not, I have 2 examples. This is a home we sold on the left here. Actually, we sold both these homes, but they're different stylistically. Bright, clean, simplified is very popular right now, but there is a trend going back to more is more. I think the pendulum always swings the opposite direction, so I can see us going back to that place. Insurance, everyone's spoken about that. We all know how difficult it is. There's a lot of people self-insuring on major properties, like $40 million properties, self-insuring. California Fair Plan. There was rumors that there was going to be that if you're a business entity, you could get up to 20 million, but I think that might only be for, I'll leave that to the insurance specialist, but that news came out about that, and all the agents were texting each other that would be a game changer, but I don't think that's happening. People are packaging policies with houses in other regions, which is extremely helpful. But it's an issue on every high-end home, especially any high-end home with big square footage in the hills. It is really hard. And we've had a few miracles along the way, but it's not getting easier. The forecast, are people going to sell COVID purchases and move back to major cities? I used to be in the art business. My dad's had an antique store on San Isidro Road since 1969. And I remember with him going through different stages in the late 1990s with the tech boom. At that time, we would have people going to a store with trucks, filling them up, taking them to properties, and it was the good old days for him. And then a lot of those people a year later were reselling all the things back to them, and they were moving back to major cities. I think we have a major shift in society where people put a high priority on lifestyle, and I think that's here to stay. I think if you look at social media trends, news trends, everything is about travel, wellness, and health. The new status symbol is being healthy. People are, I mean, we're all real estate agents, so this doesn't really apply, but people are drinking less. But the forecast is the demand for high-end properties that are updated, priced correctly, will always be successful. And I'm telling all my buyers, like, there's trades happening right now that are way below ask, and all my sellers are saying, if their house isn't selling, they're saying, why aren't people bringing us an offer? Buyers do not write offers for houses that are, I would say, 10% overpriced. They just don't. It's a weird psychological thing. They don't want to offend the seller. That's something that I don't want to offend them. They're not going to accept it, and I'm like, just write the offer. I mean, the house that just traded on Meadowbrook came on the market for $13 million and just traded for 9.6. And that's, you know, a great location. It was kind of an upside down house, but great location, views, in a really desirable neighborhood. You know, I know about a property that's listed for close to 10 million that's going to trade for 8 million right now. And I was shocked to hear that. So I would just say for anyone with buyers, when the interest rates start dropping, there's going to be so many people coming into the buyer pool. So I would jump on it right now, write offers. Like, you're not going to offend anyone. You might offend them for 1 second, but they might go, okay. But, you know, we did a deal recently for a property that was originally listed at 21 million, and when we first came to the seller, we offered 17.5, and I don't want to say what, I know the agent really well, and he's like, this is exactly what he said. I didn't say it to my client, but it was an interesting response. And then 3 weeks later, they called us and they're like, hey, are you guys still interested? And we ended up closing the deal for 17.5. And so I think a lot of these houses that are not trading are not getting offers. And so if you make a stab at it, people might go for it. So that's basically all I have, but I guess just in closing, I think it's going to be a really exciting year, especially towards the end of the year. I think if it's true that the Fed's going to drop interest rates 4 times over the next year, I think the market's going to really start surging. And if it was any indication, it dropped for a week, and my phone was going nuts. And if that happens again, when that happens again, just have all your buyers prepared, because they're going to have a lot of company. So just looking forward, I'm very optimistic going over the next couple of years and towards the end of this year. So that's all I got. Appreciate it.